Being alone at night is different. The silence feels too loud, every creak and rustle suddenly unexplainable. Your mind starts playing tricks on you. Was that a shadow moving, or just your imagination? You tell yourself you're being paranoid, but deep down, you know something feels off. The worst part? It's not always your mind. Sometimes, that feeling of being watched isn't just in your head, and by the time you realize you're not actually alone, it's already too late. The weekend was supposed to be uneventful. My dorm mate Kevin had gone home for the weekend, leaving me alone in our tiny dorm room. I didn't mind. A quiet weekend to myself sounded nice, until I heard the glass break. It was around midnight. I had been watching videos on my laptop, mindlessly scrolling through social media, when the unmistakable sound of shattering glass echoed from the small kitchenette. My stomach twisted into a knot. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but that didn't make sense. We were on the 4th floor, and the door was locked. I hesitated before getting up, listening for any further sounds. Silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Slowly, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, inching toward the kitchenette. I expected to find a broken cup, or maybe a dish that had slipped off the drying rack. Instead, the small window above the sink had a gaping hole, jagged edges of glass still clinging to the frame. Cold night air seeped into the room. My pulse quickened. That's when I heard it. A soft shuffling sound. From inside the dorm. I whipped around, shining my phone's light toward the darkened corners of the room. My bed. Kevin's bed. The closet. Everything looked normal. But I knew I wasn't alone. The room felt wrong. Heavy. Like something unseen was watching me. Then something moved. The closet door, opened just a crack, creaked slightly, as if nudged from the inside. I swallowed hard. My gut screamed at me to run, to get out and find someone. But instead, I stepped forward, my hand shaking as I reached for the door handle. I yanked it open. Nothing. Just my hanging clothes swaying slightly, the darkness inside stretching deeper than it should have. The relief I felt was short-lived. From behind me, something let out a low, wet breath. I spun around, my phone's light sweeping across the room. Empty. But the feeling of being watched intensified, like unseen eyes were burrowing into me. I backed away, my brain scrambling for logical explanations. The broken window, the strange sounds, the heavy air pressing down on me. It had to be in my head. And then my phone screen flickered, the flashlight cutting out. The dorm was swallowed in darkness. A noise came from Kevin's bed, the unmistakable sound of sheets shifting, as if someone or something was getting up. My breath caught in my throat. I turned, fumbling for the light switch, and flipped it on. Yellow light flooded the room. Kevin's bed was empty, but the blankets were rumpled, as though someone had just been lying there. A chill ran through me. The feeling of being watched grew unbearable. I couldn't stay here. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the door. Just as I twisted the handle, my phone buzzed in my hand. A text from Kevin. "Dude, I forgot to tell you. If you hear anything weird this weekend, don't open the closet." My breath stopped. My hands went cold. Slowly, I turned to face the closet I had just thrown open minutes ago. It was closed again. And then, the door handle turned. It started out as a normal weekend getaway. My friends and I had rented a secluded Airbnb deep in the woods, the kind of place with no neighbors, no street lights, and barely any cell service. The house itself was old but charming, with creaky wooden floors and a musty smell that hinted at its age. It was exactly what we were looking for, a quiet escape from the city. The first night was filled with drinking, laughter, and card games, but by 1 a.m., everyone had gone to bed. I stayed up a little longer, scrolling through my phone on the couch, relishing the silence. That's when I saw it. A shadow moved in the hallway. I froze, my heart thudding against my ribs. The only light in the house came from the dim glow of a single lamp by the couch. And from where I was sitting, I could see down the entire hallway leading to the bedrooms. The shadow had been quick, just a fleeting movement at the edge of my vision. But I was sure I'd seen something. I sat there for a long moment, barely breathing, listening for any sound that might confirm I wasn't imagining things. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it must have been a trick of the light or my own exhaustion playing with my senses. Still, I turned off the lamp and hurried to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of something clattering in the kitchen. I sat up, groggy, expecting to hear my friends talking and making breakfast. But when I checked my phone, it was barely 6 a.m. Too early for any of them to be up. I pulled on a hoodie and crept down the hallway. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of wood shifting in the cold morning air. As I stepped into the kitchen, I stopped dead in my tracks. The fridge was wide open. A carton of eggs had fallen to the floor, their contents oozing across the tiles. But that wasn't what made my skin crawl. The back door was unlocked. I was certain we had locked it before going to bed. A surge of dread crawled up my spine as I reached out and slowly pushed it shut, engaging the deadbolt with shaking fingers. I tried to tell myself that maybe one of my friends had come down for a snack and forgotten to close it properly, but a sick feeling in my stomach told me otherwise. I cleaned up the mess and waited for the others to wake up. When they did, I casually asked if anyone had come into the kitchen earlier that morning. They all shook their heads, still half asleep, mumbling groggy denials. I didn't tell them what I had seen the night before. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made my pulse jump. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. But then, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving just outside my bedroom door. I squeezed my eyes shut, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I wanted to scream, but my throat had closed up with fear. The footsteps stopped directly outside my door. I could hear breathing, ragged and low, like someone struggling to stay quiet. Then a soft tap on the wood. Just once. I stayed frozen in place for what felt like an eternity, my body rigid with terror. I don't remember when I finally drifted off, but when I woke up, sunlight was streaming through the windows, and everything was quiet. I rushed to the door and yanked it open. The hallway was empty, but there was something new. On the floor, just outside my door, was a single muddy footprint, and next to it, scratched into the wooden planks with something sharp, were 3 words. You saw me. I wanted to leave right then and there, but I didn't know how to explain it to my friends without sounding insane. So I stayed, convincing myself that maybe it was a prank. Maybe one of them was messing with me. That night we all stayed up late, watching movies in the living room. I forced myself to stay with them, too afraid to be alone. But at some point, exhaustion took over, and I dozed off on the couch. I woke up to the sound of breaking glass. I shot up, my heart pounding. The TV was still playing, but my friends were all asleep, sprawled out on the couches and floor. Then I heard it again, a sharp crunching sound, like someone stepping on shattered glass. The sound was coming from the hallway. Shaking, I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on the broken remains of the hallway mirror. The glass was scattered across the floor, but what made my blood run cold was the reflection staring back at me. Not mine. A figure stood just beyond the light's reach, tall and unmoving. Its face was featureless, a dark void where eyes and a mouth should have been. As soon as I registered what I was seeing, the figure stepped back, vanishing into the shadows. I screamed. My friends jolted awake as I scrambled backward, pointing toward the hallway. They turned on the lights, but there was nothing there. Nothing except another message, scrawled into the wood beneath the shattered mirror. I see you. We left the house that morning without packing, without saying a word. We drove straight home, shaking and silent. I never told my friends about the first message, or the shadow I had seen that first night. It started as a simple favor. My friend Jessica had begged me to house sit for her family while they were out of town for the week. The house was a massive colonial-style home in the woods, isolated from any neighbors. It was the kind of house that creaked and groaned with the wind, the kind that felt alive in the worst possible way. I wasn't thrilled about being alone in such a secluded place, but Jessica assured me there was nothing to worry about. Just feed the cat and lock the doors at night, she had said with a laugh. The scariest thing you'll deal with is the old plumbing. The first 2 nights were uneventful. I kept myself occupied with movies, junk food, and scrolling mindlessly through my phone. But on the 3rd night, I heard something that made my skin crawl. It was past midnight, and I was curled up on the couch when I heard a sound coming from the basement. At first, it was soft, just a faint rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming against a wooden table. I turned down the TV and listened. The noise continued, steady and deliberate. I told myself it was probably the pipes or the old house settling. But then the tapping stopped abruptly, only to be replaced by a low, guttural whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but there was no mistaking the voice. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the house. Someone was down there. My heart hammered in my chest as I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, Jessica's fireplace poker. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to lock myself in the bedroom and call the cops, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I turned my back on the basement, something would crawl up behind me. With shaking hands, I approached the basement door. It was slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness that seemed unnaturally thick, as if the basement swallowed all light. I took a deep breath and pushed it open wider. The wooden steps groaned under my weight as I descended. The air grew colder with every step, carrying the scent of damp earth and something metallic like rust or blood. The basement should have been pitch black, but there was a dim, flickering glow coming from around the corner. I crept forward, peeking past the brick wall. My stomach clenched at the sight before me. An elderly couple stood in the center of the basement, surrounded by a crude circle drawn in what looked like dried blood. Candles flickered on the concrete floor, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. They were whispering in unison, their voices overlapping in a haunting chant. The woman turned slightly, and I saw her face. Sunken eyes, skin stretched too tight over her skull, lips moving rapidly as she muttered something unintelligible. The man beside her reached into a burlap sack and pulled out something squirming. My breath hitched as I realized it was a cat. Jessica's cat. Its terrified yowls echoed through the basement. Before I could think, before I could act, the old man produced a curved blade from the folds of his robe. He raised it high, ready to strike. "Stop!" The word tore from my throat before I could stop myself. Both heads snapped toward me, their eyes locking onto mine. The woman's mouth twisted into a grin, revealing yellowed teeth. The man's grip on the knife tightened. For a moment, no one moved. Then the woman whispered something, and the basement light, an old buzzing bulb, shattered. Everything was plunged into darkness. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, stumbling up the stairs, my legs barely working. Behind me, I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, not rushing, as if they knew I wouldn't escape. I burst into the living room and slammed the basement door shut, locking it. My breath came in ragged gasps as I backed away, waiting for the doorknob to turn. But nothing happened. The house was silent again, as if I had imagined the entire thing. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking as I dialed Jessica's number. She answered groggily, her voice thick with sleep. "Jess," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who else has a key to your house?" "No one." "Why?" I hesitated, then asked the only question that mattered. "Do you know an old couple? Maybe former owners or—" She went silent for a moment, before exhaling sharply. We bought the house from an estate sale. The original owners were a couple, but they died years ago. I felt my stomach drop. "Died how?" She hesitated again, then finally said, "A murder-suicide. The husband killed his wife in the basement, then hanged himself. My parents didn't tell me until after we moved in." A cold, creeping dread wrapped around me. I turned toward the basement door, half expecting it to burst open. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, clutching the fireplace poker, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. By morning, I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, I had hallucinated the whole thing out of fear. I left Jessica's house as soon as the sun was up. I didn't even pack my things. She could keep my damn pajamas. But the nightmare didn't end there. For the next few nights, I kept hearing whispers in my apartment. Soft, indecipherable murmurs just outside my bedroom door. My cat, usually calm, hissed at empty corners, her fur bristling. Shadows flickered in my peripheral vision, but when I turned, nothing was there. The worst part came 3 nights later. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of slow, deliberate tapping. It was coming from inside my closet. I lay frozen, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The tapping stopped, and then a whisper. Low, guttural, and impossibly close. I gathered my courage, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight. The closet door stood slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness so thick it seemed to pulse. My hand trembled as I reached for the door. I yanked it open. Nothing. Just my clothes, swaying slightly, as if disturbed. But as I turned away, my phone flashlight flickered, and for the briefest moment, I saw them. The old couple, standing in the corner of my room, smiling,